What is going on, YouTube? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review the debut album by rock band The Killers. Basically, this album is called Hot Fuss, and it came out in the late spring of 2004. Now, I've owned this album for a couple of years. I wanted to get around to reviewing it finally. I've been messing with it since about the summer of 2021. I wanted to kind of see what's up with it more full-blown. This album's particularly notable just for having some large hit singles, particularly Mr. Brightside, which was one of the largest rock songs of the 2000s decade, and then Somebody Told Me was a pretty good highlight also. But I'm kind of redoing this intro just because I accidentally deleted this particular intro when I was reviewing this originally. So this is kind of like a revamp of that particular one. But I'm going to go ahead and talk about this, just talk about like Mr. Brightside and some of those type songs, because this is a pretty notable album just in terms of like the 2000s decade, and just overall it was pretty widespread. This is a pretty notable 2000s era rock album, kind of similar to Green Day's American Idiot and My Chemical Romance's Three Cheers for Sweet Revenge. Like, particularly the singles on here did a massive amount of damage and just made a lot of noise. I would have to say, like, Mr. Brightside was just a huge, ubiquitous song throughout the 2000s decade. It's one that continues to get plays today, and it just really did, like, was big on MTV and VH1 and some of those type places. This was a pretty large and just marketable kind of album. The thing about it was is it really had some social fare about it, where this album is kind of one that is kind of similar to like Maroon 5 and Green Day and some of those type ones, with a little bit more social kind of finesse about it. That just kind of feels like a lot more lively and just kind of social butterfly type project, just for being affable and kind of gabbish and that type stuff. I would just have to say it just kind of works in that sense. But we'll go ahead and talk about the singles now. So there were four of them, and they all did like a particular amount of damage. So I would have to say the first single is Mr. Brightside, and this one came out in the fall of 2003. This is some bleary makeshift brunch time pep, I would say. It's a social, lively song with an in the mix kind of bustle about it. So this is definitely one, just like Somebody Told Me, that really has like a good sense of edginess about it. And it's the candid, it's really kind of social, but it's candid about being. So it's just kind of the concept of this. I feel like most of this album is kind of in the mix, and it's not really like stoic or kind of off the side or antisocial or something like that. This is definitely, like, I feel like Brandon Flowers, the lead vocalist off this band, is kind of similar to like Billy Joe Armstrong, and then like the guy from Maroon 5, Adam Levine, some of those type folks. He just has like a certain social affability about him that just kind of works. It's just as good concepts as far as that kind of goes. It's definitely one where the lyrics in Mr. Brightside particularly deal with some hardships and just mishaps as far as that kind of goes. But I look after it, just kind of it keeps that kind of candid kind of, I mean, I think part of what makes this song a winner is just the affability behind it, just how folks are kind of like, damn, I'm kind of going through some hard times, but you just look after it just being Mr. Brightside and just being able to roll with the punches and that type of stuff. But I kind of look after it. It's just, to me, it's this very much makeshift kind of brunch time pep, where I feel like this is just kind of going to work 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock in the morning, that type of stuff, just getting like coffee and that sort of nonsense. Just getting coffee and that sort of stuff as far as that kind of goes. Just the good bustle of the morning and brunch time and lunch and that type of stuff. This works as like some kind of dreary malaise about it, but it's just good, affable single. Deserved the success it got. The second single is the one that I prefer more on this album. This is definitely a hot ticket of one, and this second single is Somebody Told Me. This is like some evening dance bustle, and it's just got some candid social fare. It's flashy, the flashy and crisp club single, I would definitely say. So this is just one, this is very hooky, very emphatic song. Just a real nice crisp one that just does a lot of damage and just works extremely well as far as that's kind of concerned. Just very much how a rock single, and especially a rock club single, should kind of sound. This is just one that just has like all the packaging that it needs. I'm surprised that this one didn't hit higher on like the Billboard. I want to say it was like a top 60 single, but it definitely should have done better than that. I think it charted like number 3 on the rock charts, but it definitely is another ubiquitous one out of the 2000s. Like, once again, I'll mention that Mr. Brightside is just a central song out of the 2000s decade. Like, when you think of makeshift and kind of workaday type stuff, this is one that was all over MTV. Mr. Brightside was all over MTV, was all over radio throughout the 2000s. Just one that just consecutively got spins. But Somebody Told Me is another good example. These were a great 1-2 punch for this album that just was all over the place. This one's not quite as makeshift, but I do like the affability of this one as far as the context of. I do like the affability of Somebody Told Me. It's just like some night fare just for having a good dance romp as far as that kind of goes. It's very bustling and kind of candidly social and like a more kind of busybody kind of tone. So I like that one. And then All These Things That I've Done is the third single. Now, this was the fourth single in the United States. Really, Smile Like You Mean It was the third single here in the United States. In the UK is the order that Wikipedia lists it. So I'll just go ahead and talk about all these things that I've done. This is kind of like a lazy late day malaise makeshift fair, I would say. It's just kind of one that's very dreary. It's kind of it can also feel like this is also some good dreary bar after hours where you're just kind of at a bar and you're just a little bit slizzard trying to figure out how you're going to get home, that type of stuff. Just kind of slumped there, that type of stuff. Just listening to the drunken kind of tunes and singing and that type of stuff as far as that kind of goes. Just a nice one. But it's also pretty good makeshift. I feel like this song is one that's kind of where I feel like Mr. Brightside is kind of more brunch and morning kind of commerce. I feel like all these things that I've done is kind of more late day commerce for just winding down, getting to go home, something like that. I feel like it's just kind of a lot more of a winding down kind of song, just more malaise, just about this kind of this really kind of relaxed and simmering down kind of tone as far as that kind of goes, I would have to say. But it is a pretty nice song. All of these, like, I feel like Somebody Told Me and Smile Like You Mean It are like the more kind of uppity ones, but really there's not a ton of songs like Somebody Told Me. So if you do like that kind of tempo and this overall energetic, kind of kinetic kind of dance job, there's not a ton like it. But I do feel like Mr. Brightside, despite the fact that that's morning kind of commerce and that type of stuff, I do feel like it has like a certain degree of social pep where you're not just gonna go home and go to sleep and that type of stuff. It really kind of has some edginess about saying that there is going to be some bustle. So I do like the concept of some of these, but all these things I've done is just kind of like that 4:30, 5:30 p.m. evening fare as far as that kind of goes. And then Smile Like You Mean It's the fourth single. And Smile Like You Mean It's the fourth single. This is a Traverse song. It's some evening pep and it's mildly exhilarating and it's getting ready for a time, I would say. Definitely getting ready to have a time, something like that. So it just kind of has the concept of getting ready to step out. It's kind of a good pairing with like Somebody Told Me. It's the same kind of fare as far as just like those engaging kind of riffs on there that just kind of give it that particular evening kind of edge where it's kind of the opposite, or at least not a different day, I would say, than all these things that I've done. This has a different mood and just kind of different set in motion as far as that kind of goes. Where Smile Like You, I feel like Smile Like You Mean It's kind of a good pairing with Somebody Told Me, and then like Mr. Brightside and all these things that I've done are kind of like that standard work day. So that's kind of the concept where two singles work for one day, two singles work for another day. It's a good concept to kind of get that because not all albums kind of do that sort of thing, but I do like the concept of that. There's 12 songs on this album that I'm reviewing, and the 12th song is Glamorous Indie Rock and Roll, which I didn't recommend that song, but I am going to recommend the 8 songs out of 12 I recommend. So basically those 8 songs would be Mr. Brightside, Somebody Told Me, All These Things That I've Done, Smile Like You Mean It, Jenny Was a Friend of Mine, On Top, Change Your Mind, and Believe Me, Natalie. So basically, I would have to say I don't really feel like getting the deluxe edition, or I don't feel like getting the bonus track edition with Glamorous Indie Rock and Roll is really worth it because it's not that hip a song. I kind of felt like, I mean, it was decent indie rock, but I just didn't like the kind of piano keys in the song. It didn't really suit the or it didn't really. I felt like the piano keys in Glamorous Indie Rock and Roll didn't really suit the song that well. But to talk about some of these, like On Top. Like On Top is some late day commerce malaise with minor dance fare. I would say it's a good evening bop for being out on the town. This is another one that I would pair up with like Somebody Told Me and a little bit of Smile Like You Mean It. This one just has some real kind of electronic chirps on there. I really like the beginning of the song, so I thought that was how the instrumentation of the song was going to turn out. But it does kind of have like some simmering kind of almost glum piano keys or just guitar licks in the song, not piano keys, but guitar licks on the song. It just really worked. I just feel like I like the malaise of that particular kind of song. It's definitely one that's kind of almost makeshift, but it also has some stepping out fray about it. So these are just some good ones. I do feel like the Killers on Hot Fuss has a pretty good sense of nightlife. It's just good to get some of these ones with some pep on here. It's not quite as sheerly riveting as like Somebody Told Me, but it's kind of one that's pretty close to it. It's definitely one I recommend. And then Change Your Mind. And Change Your Mind was an evening song with Bustle. It's a regular vanilla commerce gem, I would say, and it's just good blue collar. So this is kind of one that's another one that's like all these things that I've done and some of those type ones. So this is a pretty good sense. Like when I said this has some night fare, it also has some good evening and day fare for just kind of 4:30, 5:30 p.m. Just car ride home, that type of stuff, getting done with the malaise and just that good feeling, just being in the car, going and picking up some food, something like that. And just kind of the after hours, just the day after hours commerce as far as that kind of goes and such. But it's just kind of another stock one. This, I feel like Change Your Mind was definitely pretty vanilla is in terms of the instrumentation on there. And then Believe Me, Natalie. And Believe Me, Natalie was a Traverse song with solid drear. It reminds me of Coldplay in a lot of ways. It's just a song that you get lost in the malaise for. I definitely feel like this one's just a very deep song. This really reminds me. It's pretty like I mean, this one just has a lot more calm and just more kind of sedate, and just overall like mature kind of feeling about it. It's not quite as much of a bop or as much of like a stepping out kind of tone. This really feels like something, it's a decent car drive, something like that. Definitely a Travers song, just with a lot of drear about it. Just looking at sunset skies, that type of stuff, really kind of gave me Coldplay kind of vibes. The band, as far as that kind of goes, just would have to say that's a nice one. And then Jenny Was a Friend of Mine. This is kind of like a hazy dance club bop. I would say it's a good pairing to have with Somebody Told Me, and just has some nice glitz about it. Yeah, I did like the instrumentation quite a bit on Jenny Was a Friend of Mine. It's just a real nice kind of glitzy one that just did a lot of damage. I definitely think that that was pretty much one of the better ones compared to some of the jivier ones like Somebody Told Me, Smile Like You Mean It, and On Top. Definitely a good pairing of those. That's kind of the concept about this album. Talk about some of the ones I didn't enjoy on here. Like, I feel like some of these productions or some of these instrumentations on here were just kind of not as good. Like, I really, like I said, I didn't appreciate Glamorous Indie Rock and Roll that much. I kind of feel like that was a decent indie rock song and could have been better, but I just felt like the instrumentation, the arrangements of what was in that song just didn't quite have it have as much edge. I feel like Everything Will Be All Right was just kind of another drunken kind of one that's very similar to all these things that I've done. This is kind of one of those dreary kind of Everything Will Be All Right. It's just kind of one of those dreary kind of bar after hours kind of tones where you just kind of drunken and slumped in the booth, something like that, as far as that's kind of concerned. But it just didn't pull it off as well as the single version of that did. All these things that I've done is just the better one. It's a decent attempt. I did like the fact that they tried to have some dreariness towards that one, but it just didn't quite work that well. I feel like the Midnight Show, I didn't really, two songs I didn't like the composition of were Andy You're a Star and Midnight Show. They just didn't quite have the production arrangements that I pretty much would have wanted. I felt like some of these were just kind of draggy kind of songs that just didn't quite nail it quite as well. I feel like there's definitely better album cuts on here. Like, I feel like even though the end of the album's kind of more, even though the end of the album's kind of more of a drag, I kind of feel like some of these ones on here, like Change Your Mind, Believe Me, Natalie, On Top, kind of have some of that edge. But I kind of know this is just a very short and snappy album, so I really kind of wanted another song like Somebody Told Me, or even another song that has the same kind of bleary kind of pep of Mr. Brightside. But a lot of the songs on this album are pretty different, and you just don't get like an arrangements of really getting clones of the songs you want. But luckily there is like nightlife songs and day life songs as far as that's kind of concerned. But there are some kind of moments that are just kind of like a dry spell that just kind of feel like awkward moments that just don't quite nail it as well. So this is kind of the concept. I just feel like the arrangements behind like Andy You're a Star and Midnight Show just didn't quite hit as heavily, and they're just were kind of ones that were not quite as edgy, especially in terms of the appeal that they had for the production values of them. So that's kind of the thing. But for me to like basically 8 songs out of 12 on here, but really it would be 8 out of 11. I think to really say 8 out of 11 is even better, just because the version of the album that I own does not have Glamorous Indie Rock and Roll, which is a song I don't even recommend. So to really get the 11 song version on this album is a good green light to kind of have. So for me to say me liking 8 songs out of 11 or 8 songs out of 12, I'm going to go ahead and give this album like a 9.25 out of 10. I would give it a 10, but I kind of feel like I would give this album a higher score than a 9.25 out of 10. But I do feel like the snappiness of this album, I mean, you do get some good nightlife songs and good day commerce kind of songs as far as that kind of goes. But I really feel like just how much I infectiously kind of like Somebody Told Me, it is kind of a disappointment that the only other song that's really like it is just On Top. And I think that's kind of the concept. It's the same thing with Mr. Brightside. The singles are so good that you do kind of want like more songs like it. Like Mr. Brightside is such a good song, but it just doesn't have any pairings to really go along with it. I do feel like all these things that I've done is at least a similar song to Mr. Brightside, but not in the same vein as it. It's the same thing with Somebody Told Me, where there's not another song in the same vein, which Smile Like You Mean It's kind of some evening commerce as far as getting ready to step out. But in terms of like the sheer dance club flash, there's not a lot of dance club songs on this album, which I think it could have used, is because I think Brandon Flowers' social personality is just meant to kind of have more kind of glitzy kind of moments that are just not showcased. That's kind of why I would give it like a 9.25 out of 10. But in terms of the social score, I'm going to give the social score like an 8.5 out of 10. I'm going to give the social score an 8.5 because this is kind of a snappy album. It does have some social affability, 4 huge singles, which definitely work, but I just kind of feel like it's just very kind of short-lived. I feel like this is not an all day and tomorrow kind of album where it does have the moments, but it basically has like one like fix for every single type of person or angle that you want. And I feel like there's like 4 good nightclub songs. There's 4 night out songs, but they're different variations. And there's 4 kind of commerce songs as far as that kind of is concerned, like Mr. Brightside, Smile Like You Mean It, like Mr. Brightside, all these things that I've done, Believe Me, Natalie, and Change Your Mind. But then there's also songs like On Top, Somebody Told Me, Smile Like You Mean It, and uh, Jenny Was a Friend of Mine. So it's just kind of the concept of getting some of these as far as like, you get these type of songs, but they're just in different veins. You just have to kind of go with different moods as far as if you just want specific songs that are similar to what you got. It just doesn't quite do that, but it is good. I mean, it's a good album. I just give it an 8.5. And of course, Mr. Brightside and Somebody Told Me are massive, huge songs that continue to get airplay today. So you'll definitely find something, but they're just for different days of the week and different moods and just different altitudes as far as that kind of goes. But that's kind of thing. So 9.25 out of 10, 8.5 social. In terms of the future, like the Killers have been dropping albums. There is another one I'm going to get to soon enough. I'm going to review their 2006 album. I'm going to review their 2006 album down the road. And I'm going to wind up reviewing a lot more of these. We'll just have to see what's up with them. That's some good concepts here, and I did definitely feel like this is a pretty excellent debut.